Okay, there was a little bit of an intro there. All right, I think I'm back on now. Okay, I'm jacked on coffee. In this talk, it's going to be action-packed. We're going to be building a Quasar app that exports to Capacitor. So it's going to work on Android and iOS. We're also going to play around with Bluetooth once we've got it working on Capacitor. Then we're actually going to build something for Electron, and I'm going to show you how to minimize, maximize, and close a frameless app in Electron. And then we're actually going to build a browser extension using Quasar, and I'm going to show you how you can inject code into a page with a browser extension. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. First, I just want to show you what it's like to create a new Quasar app. We can say yarn create Quasar, or whatever the PNPM bun or NPX alternative is for that. But this is something that I prepared earlier. And the first thing I want to show you is just this left menu here where we've got source BEX, source Capacitor, source Electron. This is where all of the specific code for different platforms sit. So by default, we actually don't get any of these folders. By default, it's just everything we need to build an SPA. However, if you want to export to these different platforms, you can now jump into these folders and do code that is specific to that platform. Okay, so first things first, we're going to work with a Capacitor app. So to do that, we would say yarn dev and set the mode equal to Capacitor. But then we also have to say the target as well, because this is going to work for Android and iOS. So I'm going to set the target equal to Android. Give that a second to run. And this starts up a dev server with Vite. And what it actually means is that we get live code updates on our app. So you can still view it on your phone, and all of the updates that you make are actually going to show up on the app as well, which is really, really cool. Okay, so there's my phone. This is going to launch the app. Let me just make sure that it's opened up. And we can see that at the bottom here, it's doing some stuff. It's doing some, it's basically building the foundations for the app. And then when that's done, it's going to launch on my phone. And while that goes, I'll quickly show you. If we jump into Chrome, //inspect/# devices, this is basically a special place in Google Chrome. There's probably something similar in Firefox, I'm not sure, where we can actually inspect our app now. So it's just like working on a web app, except this is inside of our phone. Pretty cool. All right, so we're going to play around with Bluetooth. So what we're going to do is I'm going to whack this on the side, whack that on the side, and just make things look a little bit cleaner. What I always do this, I always do live streams where there's no, slides or anything like that. It's just building stuff from scratch, which is a bit crazy. So things could go wrong. But now that that's running, we're going to install a plugin to work with Bluetooth. Now, Capacitor actually supports Cordova plugins as well. So we're going to use a Cordova plugin to work with Bluetooth. To do that, we can say yarn add Cordova-plugin-ble-central. I actually already did this earlier, so I don't have to run that command. And now let's jump into a page that I built earlier, source, pages, Capacitor page. We come in here, Capacitor Bluetooth. Basically, this file here is this page over here. Okay, so the first thing is we've got a place to put our Bluetooth devices. And this plugin actually gives us this BLE variable for free. So now we can say, for example, let's have a function that does some scanning. And then we can say BLE, whoops, done a weird import thing there, BLE.scan. And then we can say the services that we want to scan for. I'm going to leave that as an empty array, which basically means just scan for everything. Next, we'll say how long we'll scan for, which will be 5 seconds. And then when it's finished scanning, we can take in the device that it's found. So every single time it finds a new device, it calls this callback, and then we can do something with that device. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this Bluetooth device object and say, hey, let's use the device ID for that and set it equal to the device. All right. Let's whack in a pre-tag here just so we can see what we're playing around with. We'll see the devices there. This is a really cool tip, by the way, just putting your data inside of pre-tags. It means that you get really nice formatted version of your data that you can easily see. So instead of console.logging, often I'll just whack things in a pre-tag. Okay, now let's have a button that actually performs that scan. And we'll have an icon called MDI Bluetooth. By the way, cool tip here. With Quasar, you can have an icon library, or you can actually import icons on the fly, which is what we're doing here. So you can see I've just imported MDI Bluetooth from Quasar's icon library there. And that means that rather than importing all of the icons, we can just cherry pick the ones that we need, and we end up with a much smaller file size. Okay, so let's say that when we click on this button, we're going to perform a scan. So we'll click on that button, and there we go. It goes ahead and scans, and these are all of the devices that it was able to find. Now, let's quickly see if we can do some connecting as well. By the way, actually, let's stop for a second. Look at how quickly we were able to build a Quasar app and start working with Bluetooth. So a lot of you hardware devs out there are probably pretty excited now. We've done some really cool stuff in the hardware industry where we can just very quickly prototype things and start getting connected to Bluetooth devices. Like in the fuel industry, we were able to create something that pumps fuel, gives feedback of what was pumped and all that jazz. Really, really cool. And this is quite capable. You can even do over-the-air updates. So if you need to update a device, this API is actually capable of doing that. And in my experience, it's actually pretty fast as well. So next thing we're going to do is connecting to devices. So we'll say function connect. We'll accept a device in there. And this is pretty straightforward. We can just say ble.connect. I don't know if this will work for any of these devices. So we'll handle the error case as well. And we'll send through the device.id. And we'll also have a callback for success. And I'm just going to console.log success there. Copy paste that down. And then we'll have an error for that one. All right. So the first callback is for success. Second one's for an error. All right. So now let's go ahead and have a list for these devices. Q list. Let's make it bordered so we can just see it a bit better. And then we'll have a Q item and we'll iterate over all of our Bluetooth devices. So how about we come up here and we grab those devices. V-4 is equal to device in object.values, because this is an object. I'm just going to turn it into an array. Object.values, Bluetooth devices. And then for the key, they all have a unique ID. So we can just say device.id. And we'll spit it out here. And I'm just going to say device.name. But if it doesn't have a name, we'll spit out the ID instead. So let's scan. There's all of our devices. Let's make it so that you can click on this, clickable. And we'll say, hey, Quasar, when I click on this, I want you to call connect and send through the device. Boom. So now when I click on one of these, let's see if it works. This is my ULA, keeps me cool at night. Success. So that's it. That's how you can easily start playing around with Capacitor APIs, or in this case, Cordova APIs as well, using Quasar. So the next thing we're going to do is play around with Electron related stuff. So I'm going to close that down. Let's just do a little bit of tidy up here. Close that. Jump out of Android Studio. We don't need that anymore. Jump back in here and have a look at what this would look like. I might even open this up so you can see it a bit better. So we're going to say yarn Quasar dev, and we'll set the mode equal to Electron. Give that a second to run. Now, one thing that I did do earlier was get rid of the frame of this app. So if you have a frameless app, kind of like Visual Studio Code, actually, which I'm pretty sure is also built with Electron. If you have a frameless app, then you have to be in charge of being able to drag that app around and close it and minimize it and maximize it and all that kind of stuff. So the way Electron app works, a very quick overview. Basically, you've got the Electron, you've got like a website, and then you've got a bridge between that website and the user's operating system. So a place where you can start playing around with like creating files, working with Bluetooth, or in this case, minimizing, maximizing, and closing the app. So all the operating type stuff is in one place. And then it has to be a communication between the code that deals with the operating system and then the code that is basically inside of the web browser. All right. If that didn't make sense, don't worry. You can ignore that I said that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some buttons up here so you can minimize, maximize, and close this app. So if we jump into source, layouts, main layout, first thing we want to do is make sure this only shows if we're in an Electron app. So I'll come up here and say const is Electron is equal to process.env.mode. So Quasar automatically gives us this mode environment variable so we can skip code or hide and show things depending on the environment. And we're going to set that equal to Electron. All right, so only if the mode is equal to Electron. And now I'm going to have a div here. and we'll say v-if is Electron, and I'll just write the text Electron for now. So there we go. That's showing up because we are in Electron mode. Next, we want to add the buttons. So let's go ahead and say q-button. And how about we say we'll have an icon equal to MDI. I think it's called window minimize. There it is. And I think we'll make this flat. Let's just see what it looks like. Yep, there it is. And I'll also make it dense as well. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So let's copy paste this down twice for the other buttons. And let's call this MDI window maximize. There we go. And then we got MDI window close, I believe that is. So there's our icons. They look a bit close together. So I'm going to use the utility classes here, q-margin, what's it called? Gutter on the x-axis. And we're going to make that small. Just sort of pushes things out a little bit. By the way, Quasar was using utility classes before it was cool. All right, so now we got those buttons. We need to make them actually do something. So what I'm going to do is jump into my source Electron directory. And if we jump into Electron preload, I might actually split the screen here and throw that over there. This is something I prepared earlier. And I'll quickly run over how this works. So what we can do is expose functionality into our application. And that's what this expose in main world does. And by saying expose in main world window API, that means const, not const. If I say window.window API, that's going to be equal to this object here. All right. So it's basically bridging the gap between our web app and the user's OS. So now what we could do is we could say const window API is equal to window.api, just to kind of make it a bit easier to access. And now we can call things like minimize, toggle, maximize, and close. And now we can start doing stuff that interacts with the user's operating system. And we can do stuff like, saving files, or in this case, minimizing, maximizing, and closing. Okay, so now we've got that available to us. We can come down here and say, yo, Quasar, when I click on this button, I want you to minimize. So window API dot minimize. I want you to minimize the window. And let's just paste these two down. And I'll do the same for toggle maximize. And I'll do the same for close. So maximize is now working. Minimize is now working. And we can close it out. How cool is that? And you can do other stuff like clicking and dragging in order to move the window, opening new windows, working with the file system. One of the reasons I use this is to build developer tools so that I can automatically generate files. So where I can create a really nice UI, and in the background that calls my hygiene generators. So if I'm using Laravel, I can generate controllers and routes, or inject into my route file, or I can generate TypeScript files for my models, all that good stuff. You can do really cool stuff like that. So pretty awesome. Next, we're going to move on to browser extensions. This one might blow your mind. So if we say yarn Quasar dev, and I want to set the mode to BEX, which stands for browser extension, we can go ahead and run that. Give it a second to run. And one of the things it does when it's finished is it tells you where that browser extension is, so you can easily install it and start playing around with it. So here we go. This is our Chrome browser extension, or if we're using Firefox, we would then use this manifest.json file. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to throw that on my other screen. Actually, quickly, I'll show you how I get there. We click on these dots. We can go to extensions, manage extensions, and we can install this new extension. And just so you don't see my file system, I'm going to do that on my other screen and paste in that link that Quasar gave us, and bam, there's our app extension. We've literally already built an app extension. And so what we can do is we can reload this extension. So if things aren't kind of being reactive, you can click on this reload button here to get those updates. And one thing I'll do is I'll click on here and show that extension. Now, one thing I did prepare earlier is we just open up the menu here and we go to source browser extension manifest.json. I changed this file a little bit. And the reason I changed it was Usually with browser extensions, you'll notice that we get this nice little window that pops up. Whereas the default behavior we get is clicking on the extension opens a whole new tab, which is the options page where you can then configure your extension. However, I wanted to be able to have it so that when I click on here, it shows a menu. And in order to do that, we just add this options UI section to our manifest.json. We tell it the page we want to send it to. So this is just a route. So if I open up my routes file, bam, this just means that it takes us to that options route. And then we're saying, hey, don't open this in a tab, open it in that cool little pop-up because it's a lot easier to develop that way. All right, so now that that's done, if we jump back in here, click on our extension, there's our Quasar app sitting inside of a browser extension. How cool is that? And the possibilities are endless here. Not only can we do that, we can also get into the developer tools. So just like Vue Dev Tools, we can start building our own developer tools using Quasar, or you can actually inject it into a page. So check this out. This is something I prepared earlier, but it is in the Quasar documentation. So what I'm about to show you, you can easily go to the Quasar docs and see how to do it yourself. If I go to example.com, this actually injects some code into this page, and our Quasar app is now part of the page. So if I click on this button here, it opens up a menu. And this is so if I were to get rid of this app extension now, if I remove that and refresh this page, notice that it's not there anymore. So this app extension is actually hijacking the page. And then you can do really cool stuff like in the YouTube. You might have seen some YouTube app extensions where it gives you extra stats for videos and extra information, or like GitHub app extensions that give you a little bit of extra information about that GitHub repo. You can now start building stuff like that with Quasar, and it's really, really easy to get started. So that's about it. I'm going to just quickly bring up some slides here to give you a quick rundown of the personal reasons that I adore this framework. Because the reason I love this framework is it's actually got nothing to do with it exporting to different platforms. That's why I came to Quasar originally. I was like, holy crap, this is cool. Now I can just build mobile apps and desktop apps really easily, like I showed you in this live stream. But I actually chose it for different reasons. And here's a few of them. The last one is the most important to me. Simple by default and extendable to the nth degree. By default, everything in Quasar is simple. For example, the table component, you just send through some rows, that's it, and it will automatically figure out how to build all the columns, and you'll get a really beautiful table. But if you want to do anything else with that table, it's possible. Quasar is very extensive with its slots. It makes sure that you are never trapped into a corner, and that is super important to me because I hate it when a client asks me to do something and I say, oh, I'm sorry, we're not set up for that. If that happens, to me, that is my fault. It's my responsibility to make sure that I can always build things that the client want in the future. There's obviously some exceptions to that. Sometimes they go wildly like off of what you were originally building and you have to like almost greenfield some things. But Quasar makes it really, really easy to tap into your components. And that's one of the reasons that I adore this framework. The other thing is updates happen fast. Quasar was one of the first major framework. In fact, it was the first major framework to move to Vue 3, which actually blows my mind. Not only can we export to all of these platforms, but the builder of this framework just went hardcore into moving us to Vue 3. And the reason he was able to do that is because it's a testament to the architecture of the framework. Because the frameworks, and not just the architecture, also a lot of thought was put into the API early on. So Razvan actually spent over 5 years dreaming up the API for this framework, which is why we have the beautiful API that we have today. So when I was in the 0.x days, you know, I'd like to imagine that he goes to bed at night and his brain is just ticking. You know, it's kind of like a beautiful mind thing is what I've got in my head. And he's like drawing on a glass window, the perfect APIs. I don't know if that's reality, but he really nailed it with the API for this framework, and it shows. And the good thing about that is we don't get API updates anymore because it's already good. It's already done right. And he's already built this in a way so that we can constantly grow our code and move forward. Last thing is, it's a component library built with love. This is why I actually love the framework, because the component library itself has been meticulously crafted. The events, the slots, the consistency of the API has been brilliant, and it's been brilliant for years, ever since version 1, which came out, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years ago. The API has been ridiculously stable, and that's super important to me. It's why I love frameworks like Laravel, because a Laravel app that I built 7 years ago is going to look pretty much the same. Even more, 8 years ago is not going to be very difficult to update. And it's the same with Quasar. I feel secure in this framework. So it's beautiful and it's secure and it stays up to date. So that's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this talk. And yeah, I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right. Thank you. And yes, you always bring the best energy. Always, every single time. And thank you for that.
You're most welcome. I love doing this and I love talking about Quasar. So bring me on anytime for Quasar and you're going to get the crazy version of me.
All right. First question of how does Quasar balance flexibility with performance?
Good question. You would have to ask Razvan about that. I know that he's using, what are they called? Render functions. I don't even know. I do everything with script set up these days. So I don't even do any of this like other lower level stuff because I've never kind of run into those problems. What I can tell you is that he has a background of doing lower level coding. And so Razvan cares a lot about the finer details of how things are run. So sometimes he will sacrifice, code beauty to make things run as fast as possible or to keep file sizes as small as possible. And I know that he cares a lot and puts a lot of time into thinking about what the code's actually doing under the hood. So honestly, I think part of the answer to that question is just a genius behind the scenes. There's a lot of other people supporting the framework, but to be honest with you, I think we've just got one guy who just really understands Vue, really understands JavaScript, and has that background of lower level languages. And that's how we've been. That's my only explanation I've got for it. I don't have a deep enough understanding of the finer details of JavaScript.
Well, thank you. All right. Can developers build offline first functionality with Quasar? And if so, how does that work?
Yes, if you're building an Electron app, it's offline. If you're building, it can be offline. Same with Cordova. You could build a PWA. So it's also got a PWA and SSR export mode, and it's even got a PWA/SSR export mode. And so we actually do this at one of the companies I work for. We build an offline first app. And basically, you're kind of going out of Quasar land now and going into Capacitor land. So all Quasar does is it makes it really easy to get up and running with Capacitor. It deals with all the annoying crap that you have to do under the hood. But once you're in Capacitor land and you've got an app that is, a mobile app, you can now do whatever you need to do in order to make it offline. So one of the things that I do with some apps is I make it so I can swap out my storage provider. So I'll have a storage provider for local storage or like IndexedDB, and I can swap that out for a storage provider that works with Capacitor or that works for Electron. And now that I've done that, I can easily swap that out, and now we can use storage on the user's device, which means that it's going to work offline. But then the other side of this is PWAs. So once you're in, PWA land, you can start using modern web technologies for like storing things in IndexedDB, doing smart things with caching. And I think by default, if you start a Quasar app as a PWA, it will actually work offline with no extra work. But as for how you do things like working with keeping an API in sync, putting things into job queues to make sure that they get pushed to your API when you're back online, things like that, you would have to sort out yourself. That's not part of Quasar's responsibility. That's like, that's user land type stuff.
Interesting. Okay. How do I choose if I should choose Electron or Capacitor? And can I build apps for both Apple and Android?
Capacitor is, so again, Quasar is just wrapping Capacitor. Then once you're in Capacitor land, it takes care of building an iOS app and an Android app. So if you're using Capacitor, you already have support for iOS. There might be, depending on some of the APIs that you want to use on the user's device, so things like Bluetooth, there might be a couple of things you need to tweak with the permission settings, but it just works. So when I start a new Quasar app and I say, run this in Capacitor mode, that will just work on iOS and then it'll just work on Android. Unfortunately, Apple forces you to use an Apple computer to do iOS apps. So I had to get a whole Apple computer just to build iOS apps. Yeah, so I think there's ways around this where you can there's services where you can get it built, but you actually can't, unless I'm wrong, you can't build an iOS app unless you've got an Apple computer. But with Android apps, you can do that on any system, Ubuntu, Linux or Windows or whatever. What's the second half of this question? Can I build up? Yeah, so that's Capacitor. Capacitor handles your mobile apps. If you want to do a desktop app, you would then use Electron. And absolutely, yes. In fact, the app I just showed you then will work for Electron, Capacitor, browser extensions, SPA, PWA, SSR. All I have to do is say, run it in this mode, and it'll just work.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Okay. Quasar is awesome, but Quasar will have component free of material style.
I think I understand what they're getting at. So I have some pretty strong opinions about this, so I might get slammed, but that's okay. It's better to live congruently in the world than to hide what you actually think. So I love that there's actually a lot of talk about this in the Quasar community. People want to be able to change the framework so that it looks how they want it to look. I personally think it's better to build an app with material design, and then just use all the default settings, even if you don't think it looks perfect, by what you want. And then when it's built and that app is making money, then you can start thinking about, manipulating it and changing it. And it's not that hard to then start adding little CSS properties because Quasar has, it's got proper naming of CSS properties. So it's not that hard to change it later on. So my personal opinion is just build it with material design. It was designed by Google. It works. It looks good. People are comfortable with it because lots of people have used Google applications. I think you should just build it with material design. And then when you want to add your own flavors, you add it on top gradually to make it start fitting more the design that you want. Now, if you really don't like that, there's actually a guy in the Quasar community who built something called, I think it's called Beautiful or something. And it allows you to very easily manipulate Quasar's designs and basically build your own theming on top of it. So this is not directly built into Quasar. There's talks about it. It might happen in the future. Personally, I don't mind. I would rather Quasar focuses on other things, makes a really nice material design framework. And then when my apps are actually making money, I will then start adding designs on top of it. So sorry, designers, if you don't like that. And I'm sure there's a great argument for the opposite, but that's just how I personally feel for the projects that I build. Yeah.
All right. And is there no TypeScript support out of the box for custom exposed methods in Window?
There is TypeScript support out of the box. There's excellent TypeScript support out of the box. One of the sponsors, there's a couple, Dream Monkey, there's a couple of guys in that team that I'm pretty sure did all of the TypeScript work, and they're dedicated to making sure that a lot of the TypeScript stuff is up to date. So even things like testing, starting new Quasar apps, you can do it. It actually paid me to do this in JavaScript, but I didn't want to do TypeScript in a live stream. I usually use TypeScript for when I'm using Quasar. And yeah, there are some things you have to do to get TypeScript working with Electron. I can't remember right now, but it's not that difficult, especially if you spend a lot of time in the TypeScript world. So absolutely, you can type all of that stuff. And you would, especially, if you got this global Bluetooth variable, you're going to want to type that because it gets confusing fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. Any advice for a newbie in Quasar development?
Yeah. The reason I love Quasar is because there's a few reasons, but one of the main reasons I love it is because of the framework and just for building websites. So one of the problems I think we have with an image in the Quasar community, if I could just be total transparent here, is that I think people see it as a bloated framework because it works for all of these different platforms. And so the natural inclination is to go, I don't want to choose this framework because I don't want to build a Capacitor or Electron or whatever app. I just want to build a web app. So my first piece of advice is use this framework. Try it even if you're just building web applications, and just ignore those other export options for now. Just build a web app with Quasar. Most of my apps that I build with Quasar because it's so freaking good at it. Web apps are not a second thought for Quasar. It's a beautiful way to build your application. So that's the first thing. Don't ignore it just because it works with all of these other platforms. Quasar's done a great job decoupling its component library from the other stuff. And the next thing is understand the API cards in the docs. So you want to understand, so the API cards in the docs are broken down into props, which you probably know about if you're a newbie. So just those props that you pass down to components. Understand the difference between a prop with a colon at the start versus without a colon. In other words, if you don't use the colon, it's just going to be a string. If you use the colon, it's going to be, you're actually going to pass, it's going to be evaluated, or however you say that. So that's the first thing, understand props. The second thing is understand events. The third thing is understand methods. And the fourth thing is understand slots. If you know the difference between those four things and you can read them and understand how they apply to the components, you can very easily understand the entirety of Quasar. Because that's all it is at the end of the day. Component libraries, they're just a bunch of props, events, slots, and the other one that I said, and methods, right? So if you know how to use all of those things, then it completely opens up the world of not just Quasar, but any library to you. And then you can go to any one of these components, go through the docs and go, yep, I know how to use that because I understand how to apply that in the real world for my application. Oh, one more thing.
Yes.
Last thing is, and this is a Vue thing, understand how Vue model works under the hood. And this isn't just Quasar. If you understand that Vue model is actually model value, model value. Oh, man, I can't remember it like on the fly now. But like if you understand that it's actually passing through a prop and then emitting an event up, attaching a listener to the component and what's happening under the hood, when you hit those edgy cases with Vue model that don't, where you can't just Vue model it and you actually need to get a bit more specific. Like, for example, if you want to hear an event on your input and then manipulate the input before you save it into a form, stuff like that, then you need to understand how Vue model actually works under the hood. And if you understand that, it really opens up the world of Vue to you.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much, Luke, for all of your insights. And you always give us so many new things to think about and get excited about with Quasar. And we greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I had a blast.